How is everybody so far today?
Pretty good, how about you?
I'm all right. This class is looking tiny. The last class, we had like 10 people in person, which I haven't had for a long time. So I just thought like the warm weather suddenly brought people back to life and we're all going to be okay. But this class is looking slim, but we'll be all right. Can the folks at home hear me okay? Oh, Thomas says dead inside. I'm sorry to hear it, Thomas. I hope you recover quickly. Oh, you don't like the warm weather? Are you a skier? I went running yesterday and I was so used to freezing cold weather. I had like hoodie, tights, wool socks, and went out and died. But I'll adjust. All right, looks like 1 o'clock and a few more people are logging on. All right, so from today's reading assignment, you know that today is about grammar and punctuation. So the roll question is, why do we make errors in grammar and punctuation? All right, let's let's open up the discussion. What do you think? Why do we, I mean, we've been speaking, reading, and writing English for however many years, right? Why do we still make errors? David suggested, he's written on the chat here, I don't know if you can read it from far away. He says, English can't follow its own rules. I think that's a good answer. I'm going to dig into it in a minute here. What other, you're getting some agreement here in the room. English can't follow its own rules. Yeah. Any other ideas? Go ahead.
I feel like from bad habits that you picked up.
Okay. We just have bad habits that we've learned and they just become a normal part of the way that we write. Okay.
Yeah, and also like writing fast, like trying to write too fast, not taking your time.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So we commit errors just from speed and then lack of attention or care or something like that. Okay. Thomas says it's hard to get perfection on the first try. Yeah. Agreed. And
Well, you're multitasking, your brain's thinking while your hand's writing. Sometimes my brain will go a little bit too fast and my hand can't keep up, so I completely miss like 3 words or finish my sentence or forget a comment somewhere.
Yeah, have you ever done that, like reviewed a paper that you wrote and like there's just like an entire word missing and you're like, what, how did I miss that? So yeah, something about the speed between how quickly we can think of things versus how quickly we can write it or type it or whatever, that there's just going to be some errors in there. Okay. I feel that way anytime I write in front of the classroom, is that I'm doing that kind of error. I suddenly can't spell, or I'm trying to talk and write at the same time, so the multitasking gets in the way. Yeah. Good. Other ideas? Was there anyone else in the room who, like if there's only 3, guess what? You're all 3 enthusiastic about this. Any new ideas, Melissa?
Well, it's pretty much, they already covered it. I
Okay.
know that when I'm writing, if I look at something, I will write the word for it. If
Yeah.
my kids are talking next to me and I'm writing, I will write what they're saying instead of what I'm.
Ooh, I've done that, yeah. Yeah, okay. Yeah, there's some, like, we learned some interesting things about how our brains work. Which, yeah, I mean, I swear, like, as a kid, I could do homework while listening to music or watching TV. At least I thought I could. And now I cannot, for that same reason. If I think I'm writing something, I'm like writing the lyrics to the song. I'm like, no, wait a second. I need to do this other thing, yeah. Good. I want to go back to David's idea that English can't follow its own rules. Does anyone else feel that you like, at some point, somewhere in your education, you learned a rule, and then you tried to follow that rule, but then you'd often get marked wrong, or you'd get corrected because the teacher was like, oh, nope, that's wrong. Nope, you've got the rule wrong. Or no, there's an exception to the rule, something like that. Like, did you ever, I remember in 2nd grade, the teacher asked, what did you do over the weekend? And one of my friends raised his hand. Me and Grandpa went fishing. And the teacher said, oh, Grandpa and I went fishing, right? And there's like, that's a correction you've heard before. And then have you ever like done it the wrong way and you say, oh, Grandpa gave my brother and I a fishing rod. You're like, no, my brother and me. You're like, well, which one is it? Is it I or me? It's like, well, if it's the subject of the sentence, it's I. If it's the object, it's me. And we're like, wait, what? Subject and object? Now I'm lost, right? So, like, generally speaking, how do we learn grammar? How do we learn punctuation? These generally, we can group them together. They're different things, right? But they're related. We can call them mechanics, like the putting together of language. Do you have an idea of, like, how do you learn grammar? Do you have an idea?
Maybe like trial and error, like getting corrected on it. Because you can explain to people something over and over, and until they like make the mistake and you show them how they made the mistake. And I feel like that's how I learned anyways.
Yeah.
You can sit up there and tell me, oh, you need to do it this way, but until
it's my mistake and show me on my mistake. Then I pick it up.
Yeah, so trial and error, and then it sounds kind of like some kind of tests and experiments, right? Yeah, good. Good. Anyone else have some insight? How do we learn grammar?
Just memorize the rules. It's really all it is.
I'm going to disagree with you in just a second, but yeah. I know that I know what you're talking about. Miguel, did you have
I was kind of.
something similar? Yeah. Okay, so like let's go back to like my broad definition here. Like, okay, so what is grammar? So I'll give this one because I've studied it. Grammar is like generally like the structure of language or the rules for putting it together. But the question of how we learn it, of course, is one that people debate about, and it's confusing because we think like, well, you know, how many of you have observed like little children learning to speak? Or can you remember your own childhood experience of learning to speak? You know, did your parents or your guardians, whoever raised you, sit you down and say, all right, subject, verb. Here's how you make the past tense. Here's how you do the present tense. Here's how you do the future. Or nobody learns language that way, right? No, you learn it because you're hanging out with a group of adults who speak the same language and you just copy them, right? So like the trial and error thing, right? Like you remember as a kid hearing a new word and then testing it out. One of my favorite examples from my own children, my oldest kid was 2 or 3 years old and he was trying to open a jar of jam and he was working on it and he went to my wife and he said, hey mom, could you open this jam for me? I can't get the damn lid off. And she looked at him and was like, huh. And she said, oh, we don't say that. And he goes, oh, but it was really hard. And thank you, yes. Because when I came home and I heard this, I said, oh no, I'm pretty sure he's correct. When it's really hard, you throw in that extra word, right? But like it's like like you test it out, right? Like I've heard this. Is this how it works? And you know, he had a good idea of it, right? But like, do you ever remember making the mistake, or you've heard a little kid make the mistake? I runned at recess. It was really fun, right? And you're like, okay, well, why is that kid making that mistake? Is it because they don't know the rules, right? Well, if you think about it, like, well, how do you make the past tense in English? Like, well, you add ed to the end of a verb, right? Like today I walk, yesterday I walked. Today I run, yesterday I run. And I'm like, oh no, right? So like the kid who makes that mistake is following a rule, but they're following the wrong rule, right? Because we're to that observation of like, English doesn't follow its own rule. There's exceptions, right? But the interesting thing is, right, is that our brains pick up on the rules and then we test them out, right? And there's very few to no adults who are going to make the mistake of saying, I runned, right? Because we figured out, we memorized the rule or something, right? Or we just observe it, right? I don't know that, you know, maybe we reached some point where somebody sat down and said, don't say run. Or maybe we just listen enough that we're like, hey, wait a second. No adults are saying run, they say ran. So I got it wrong. One of my grammar teachers in college loved to point out, how do you make the plural? Like you add S. And then he's like, okay, so, I gotta think of the right word. Oh yeah, so like you have one, no, let me think of, yeah. You know, you have one cow, you have 2 cows, right? Just put the S on the end. He's like, okay, so I have 1 ox, I have 2, and I'm like, oh, that one's oxen. That's, you know, put an S on it. And he's like, oh, I guess, right, there's a problem there. And then you start to learn the history of English, find out where words were borrowed and stolen, right? And you point out like 1 child, 2 children. You're like, wait, children and oxen, there's something there, right? But you're right, there's a whole bunch of stuff that we just, now, I don't know, did you memorize that one or did you just, like somewhere your brain just picked it up and started using it? So it's tricky, right? Because like you don't ever give a baby a grammar book and say, hey, learn English, good luck, right? But they mimic, they listen, they imitate. Punctuation, that one, you're not gonna, like we don't pick up punctuation by hearing it or anything like that. Although there's comedians who have tried to come up with ways to like put punctuation into spoken language. But we generally learn it through observation and mimicry at some level, right? We're testing it out, we're using language, we're making mistakes, we're either getting corrected or we correct ourselves as we go. But it feels, I think, a lot of times like it's guessing, or like somebody knows the rules, it's not me, and I'm getting punished for it. And we feel like it's a tool of punishment. So I'll admit, I studied grammar in college, right? You already know this. You maybe assume this about me as the English teacher. I did take a 300 level grammar class in college, as well as a history of the English language. And it was years into college before I started to feel like, oh, okay, I think I get that rule now, or I think I can do that one and catch the errors, you know. But it takes time. It takes time and practice. So I think a lot of what Brody observed is true, that like you have to just test it out. Like I even remember just being in a college class and writing out, and I created a sentence where I had the word had 2 times in a row, and I was like, well, that can't possibly be right. You know, he had the idea since yesterday, and I was like, no, there's no way that's right? Like, you just have to get into new situations, use language in a new way, and suddenly the way you think you know the rules, and suddenly you're like, I probably don't know the rules for this. And that's very often the case in college. So a lot of times, maybe you did great with grammar and punctuation through elementary school and high school, and then suddenly in college you're making errors that you didn't think you should be making. And it makes us feel kind of dumb, right? We feel like, everybody knows this but me. But the truth is, you're suddenly writing much more complicated sentences than you were writing before. You're getting into new and odd situations. I remember like the first time I tried to write a short story and I'm jumping from past to present tense, and I started making all these errors, and I was like, how have I never seen this before? And it was because I just had never tried to write in certain kinds of ways. So we make mistakes because it takes time to learn these things. The other thing we observe, so I've studied this other, like, how do I teach grammar and punctuation? Because it becomes a problem, right? Because when I talk to other people, what do you do for a living? Oh, I teach English. And they're like, oh, how do you fix people's grammar and punctuation? I'm like, studies show that teaching grammar and punctuation, like directly in lessons, generally doesn't make it better. Like, so why are we having the lesson today? So, and you think, is that a new study? Because I had college teachers who would correct our grammar and punctuation, and then someone else will say, like, oh, there's a study that shows that doesn't help. I'm like, is it a brand new study? I'm like, no, it came out in the 70s. Like, oh, okay, so we've known this for a long time. So the best way to improve your grammar and punctuation is read a lot and write a lot. That's the best way to improve, right? Because as you read more and more, you'll observe it. Things will become clearer to you. And then as you write more and more, you'll run into situations, and you might have done it already with this new assignment. I know that you were observing it, right? And some people who they're like, I'm going to tackle some Annie Dillard style sentences, and then they're like, wait a second, how do I get rid of all these blue squiggly lines, right? And so some of it we're looking at Annie Dillard and trying to imitate. Some of it we're looking up rules in the book and trying to decode the language there. And then sometimes we're just trying to create our own sentences. And I think that's the best way to learn. And of course, that's one of the reasons why my class has you read a lot and it has you write frequently, is so that you can start to figure that out. But I do think it's helpful to get kind of a common language, right? Like every once in a while, we just need, all right, look, you're going to hear the words independent clause and you're going to hear run-on sentence. We need to know what those mean so that we can start to work to eliminate those sorts of errors. So be patient with yourselves, especially, thinking like this is a 100 level writing class. So if we're still making mistakes here, there's certainly nothing wrong with you. Now, we do want to get better over time, but give yourself some time to improve. So what I've done is I selected a section of the book that has the errors that I see most frequently. So you can open up the Little Seagull Handbook to page 268. And that's one of the 2 reading assignments for today. It says editing the errors that matter. Now, for many people, after I read essay number 1, I said, hey, go read this section of the book. Or I said, I noticed a lot of comma splices, and I noticed a lot of fused sentences in your paper. And I know that that language isn't immediately clear. You're like, oh, whoops, my bad, comma splice. Of course, I'll fix that, right? You go, I've never heard of that. And I'll admit this too. When I first heard the terms comma splice and fused sentence, I was working as a writing tutor in a college writing center, and I was reading a poster on the wall, and I was like, huh. I've never heard those errors described that way. I knew what the errors were. I had never heard those words. So my goal is to give you some tools, some language for fixing that. So the main issues that I see in student papers that I think that we need to like really start to get rid of are sentence fragments, comma splices, and fused sentences. All right. So the last two here, comma splices and fused sentences, are both inside another category that we'll just call run-on sentences. There are two different types of run-on sentence. All right. And I think as we learn to fix one, then we'll also start to learn to fix the others. So a sentence fragment, simple definition is an incomplete sentence. I'll add to that, sometimes this means it's an incomplete thought. I'll add to that, it's missing either a subject or a verb. So incomplete sentence, an incomplete thought, missing a subject or a verb. And I'll also say that it usually causes some sort of confusion to the reader. All right, so page 270, fragments. At first glance, a fragment looks like a complete sentence. It begins with a capital letter and concludes with end punctuation. So, and that's one of the reasons why we miss that sort of error in our own. Well, I put a capital letter and there's a period at the end. It must be a complete sentence, right? But on closer examination, a key element, usually a subject or a verb, is missing. For example, forgot to vote. Who forgot to vote? We don't know. The subject is missing. 2 bottles of rancid milk. Wow, that sounds interesting, but what about them? There's no verb, so we don't know. A fragment also occurs when a sentence begins with a subordinating word. Now they're like, it's really easy. Now here's some new words that you've never heard of. You're like, oh no, now it sounds hard. Subordinating words such as if or because or while. But the subordinate clause is not followed by an independent clause. If the ball game is rained out. Well, what happens if the ball game is rained out? Again, we don't know. So some of the questions you can ask trying to figure out sentence fragments, we can say who or what did what. And if we can't get a clear answer to one of those, we probably have a fragment. Now, the reality is, you rarely write a sentence fragment all by itself. It's usually buried in a paragraph. And usually within the paragraph, the idea is there and we can answer those questions. And so we don't recognize our own sentence fragments because we're like, yeah, I know what's going on there. So what happens is when you pass it to somebody else, right? And usually that someone else is somebody like me, the teacher. I'm trying to make sense from capital letter to period, capital letter to period. And if I somewhere in there have to stop and go, hold on, who or what did what, and then I have to rescan the paragraph to figure it out, that's where the problem is, right? Usually when we're writing, we can write fragments and not notice them because we know exactly what we're talking about. And maybe it's back to the problem that Miguel was noticing, right? That like somewhere between the speed of our brain and the slowness of our fingers, we missed a word, we missed an idea. So let me throw a couple of sentence fragments up here on the screen and see if this can help. So if I have these, right, the dog ran down the street. Now, if I'm reading that, there's a whole lot of my brain that would be like, yeah, I get it. It makes sense, right? But because, what's our fragment here? They're both fragments, right? Because I've put the period, I'm more or less inviting readers to stop at each one of these. And if I say the dog ran down the street, then I have to say, well, I have to treat those independently. But we know that we can't. So we fix this one just by deleting and lowering that capital letter. The dog ran down the street. Now we're okay, right? But I think this is often how I'll see those kinds of things is a student will put a period for whatever reason. And when they're reading through it, they're like, dog ran down the street. Yeah, makes sense. But I'm reading and I'm like, hold on, I have to stop at the period. And that's where we see the errors. Now, how about the longer one here? My horrible high school English class, I don't get grammar. One of these is a fragment, the other is not. Which one's the fragment?
The first one.
The first one, right? So it's missing something, right? Well, what about the horrible high school English class? Now, this is also something I'm likely to run into as a grader, is because I'll go, okay, well, I know that the horrible high school English class caused the second part, right? But the writer has failed to make some connections, right? So here's where we need to throw in something like a because of my horrible English class, comma, I don't get grammar, or something like that, right? Or I say, my high school English class was horrible, period. I don't get grammar, period. Here's the other problem, is that there's usually 10 different ways we could fix bad grammar, bad punctuation. And so if I, as the teacher, go in and try to fix things in your papers, eventually I'm just changing what you said. And that's a problem. And that's a problem. Like, I shouldn't have that kind of authority, right? You get to control the meaning of your sentences. If I'm going in there and moving this and that around, putting periods here, changing that, then eventually I'm in control of your meaning. And that's a problem. So if we can learn to correct these kinds of errors, then we maintain control of our papers, right? And then eventually you can put your own sentence fragments in on purpose, right? Like we saw Judy Brady and Brett Lott playing with sentence fragments on purpose, right? To try to control some of how we read certain things. All right, let me, all right, so our book publisher is Norton, and Norton maintains a website. So I'm going to go to their website, www.nortonwritesite, excuse me, and this is listed on our syllabus. So you can see there's kind of an online version of our book here. And I'm going to click on exercises, and it's going to take us into a set of exercises that allow us to practice these. So I'm going to find the one on fragments. You can see there's editing for and identifying. We're just going to identify a couple. All right, now I have to remember a password that I created probably a decade ago. And I screwed something up. Okay. I like that it's like, you want me to save this? Like, I got it wrong. Still no. Got it. All right. We're going to preview this quiz. All right. Now, I want to point out, too, I know that one of these quiz answers is wrong because I did this in front of another class the other day. All right. So here's what we're looking at right here. And we want to say it does contain a fragment or it does not. Oh, online folks, thanks for speaking up. All right, online folks, can you see this quiz?
Yep, we can.
Thank you. All right. So we're looking at this line right here that I've highlighted. Just a note to say hi to my favorite niece. Does this contain a sentence fragment? Yes or no? Saying yes here. Any other answers? Yes. All right. How would we fix it? What's missing?
A comma next to say.
Comma won't, so generally speaking, we can't fix a sentence fragment with just a comma.
You have to add.
Yeah, it's because it's missing a subject or a verb. So that won't be sufficient. So we need more, yeah. So here's the problem with this, right? Like if you found this Post-it note on your front door, you'd be like, oh, my aunt stopped by or whatever, right? Like it makes sense, right? Or if somebody received this as a text, you'd kind of get it, right? But it's not complete by itself. In conversation and in casual interaction, sentence fragments are fine. So what we're missing is something like a this is. This is just a note to say hi to my favorite niece. I wanted to leave a note that says hi to my favorite niece. Something like that, which of course sounds very formal, and this is clearly supposed to be informal. And that then becomes one of our problems with sentence fragments, right? Sentence fragments are very informal. Writing for college, we have to be more formal more often. That's one of the reasons why we want to get good at eliminating commas, or sentence fragments, or at least we want to be totally in charge, right? So that if I've got a sentence fragment, it's on purpose, right? And so that's one of the things we want to be aware of, right? It's less formal, so it contains a fragment. All right. Now we've got this one. Because my niece is planning to attend college at Ohio State. Contains a fragment or does not contain a fragment? Nodding, some confidence. All right. So how would we fix this?
It looks like a Y, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's the word because that's the problem here. Yeah, good. So so in this case, and that's another reason why you can't just fix other people's fragments because like, I don't know what's going on here. So we could add in, because my niece is planning to attend college at Ohio State, comma, she is moving next month, right? So something like that, right? The missing information. Now, this is one of those, it's just the word because. If we get rid of that, my niece is planning to attend college at Ohio State, that's a complete sentence. That one works. That one has a subject and a verb. So this is what the book was talking about when it said a subordinating word, right? Or we also call it a dependent word. It makes it so that the second half of the words that follow because are dependent on something else for meaning, the why, right? So we'll say contains a fragment. All right. As a travel destination, Asia attracts many Americans now. Looking good. Not sure.
Not sure.
Okay.
Just because.
Can you point to what's throwing you off?
Why does Asia attract Americans?
Because it's a travel destination.
But why?
You're right. See, so here's why you're pointing out why it's difficult to catch these in isolation. Because you're right, there's missing information, right? We're like, well, that's not. But here's where we have to like kind of separate. All right, the content and the structure are kind of different things. Structurally, this one is fine. Now, I think this is the one that they've screwed up, so it'll give us the wrong answer here. But Asia attracts, there's the basic sentence. Asia is the subject, attracts is the verb. This first part, as a travel destination, is an introductory phrase. They've put a comma there, that's correct. But Asia attracts, if it were just those two words, it's complete. And the rest is just kind of icing on the cake. So you're right that we're like, well, I still don't get the whole meaning of it, but that doesn't make it incomplete. I mean, this certainly wouldn't work as a paragraph, but as a sentence, it's okay. And I'll click here and it's going to tell us we're wrong. But all right, let's do one more of these. Heading back to the States, but on edge since he survived the terrorist attack. All right, you're nodding your head that this does or doesn't?
It does.
It does contain one. All right, Melissa, any, you want to support or detract?
It doesn't say who he is.
Right, that was like, it's suddenly there in the middle. Yeah, that's part of the problem. Yeah, so, yeah, we say who or what did what, and we're like, now here, if we're good detectives, and we're smart people, right? We're like, he headed back to the States. But like the actual verb here, heading back, that's not a complete verb by itself, and our subject is buried, so something's wrong. So this one would need some revision. He is heading back to the States, but he is on edge, right? And because it's messy like that, it contains a fragment. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and stop that one there. I think we've got the general idea. And this one's not a major problem. I see it, but I don't see it too often. And usually what will happen is, because you start writing much longer sentences, a lot of times students go, that's too long, I better put a period in there. They put the period in, and then the teacher's like, that's a fragment. And they're like, I know, but it was getting too long, so I thought I should cut it in half. And a lot of times it's just because we haven't built up enough intuition or practice with that, so that, or maybe, you had a teacher who said sentences are 10 words long, and so we're like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, period. And we're like, no, it's not as easy as that. All right, so that's sentence fragments.
You could always just pull a Dillard and throw like 15 commas in there and 10 semicolons and be good to go.
And that'll lead us to the next problem. Yeah, well, so I think that's one of the other ways we try to, we call this hypercorrection, right? We're like, I know that if I put in too many periods, it's gonna have fragments, so instead I'll do commas. And that will lead us, although I'm not sure that's what Dillard was doing. All right, so let's see, I wanna go back to our notes here. So that leads us to run-on sentences, which is sort of the opposite direction. Sentence fragments, we're cutting stuff up too frequently. Run-on sentences, we're stringing things together too long. So a run-on sentence usually comes in two forms. A comma splice is we join one or more. Now I'm going to use some of the technical language here. We join two or more independent clauses, which is one way to say a complete sentence, using only a comma. All right, so the general idea we need to get here is that a comma is not a strong enough punctuation mark to join independent sentences, independent clauses. Independent clause means it's got a subject and a verb, it can stand alone. All right, so let me give you a couple of examples. Now again, my examples are going to be overly simplified, but that's so that we can recognize it first. So if I say, I love to study grammar, it is so interesting. And maybe my teacher said, hey, when ideas are related, put them together, right? So I did, comma. I love to study grammar, it is so interesting. Or I have so much. I have so much to say, I can't wait to write my essay. Now, what I have here is independent clauses or complete sentences that are joined with only a comma. I love to study grammar. There's one independent clause or complete sentence. It is so interesting. There's another. The comma isn't good enough. It isn't strong enough to join them. I have so much to say. There's an independent clause, a complete sentence. I can't wait to write my essay. There's another independent clause. Comma can't do it. So how do we fix it? Do you have any answers or ideas? There are multiple correct ways to fix this.
You could say I love to study grammar because it's so interesting.
Yep. So let's see, I'll do that underneath. So we can just ditch the comma and say because. Good. Anything else? The other one is you can add a conjunction. A conjunction. That's going to be and, but, or, so, or, yet, or, and I think nor. But you can only do the one that works. So you keep the comma. So we can say, I love to study grammar. And then I can do comma, and it is so interesting. It might work, right? I love to study grammar, but it is so interesting. That doesn't make much sense. I love to study grammar, for it is so interesting. Yeah, that one makes sense. It sounds a little old-fashioned, but it would do the job. So we do comma and a conjunction. And that'll do the job. Any other ways to fix it?
You could just make 2 sentences.
Yeah, we could put a period. Period will do the job. I love to study grammar, period. It is so interesting. Yeah. Now there's another one that we can do. Semicolon. And this is part of the Annie Dillard lesson, right? This is usually what Annie Dillard is doing, right? Is she takes ideas that are related, and they're each an independent clause or a complete sentence, and she puts a semicolon in between each one of them. And that's why her sentences become so long, is because each one could stand alone with periods. Now, a semicolon gives readers the idea that these are closely related. They go together, right? But a period is not that permanent of a separation. So, there's plenty of people who tell me, I'm not comfortable with semicolons, and I say, great, don't use them. But semicolons are a way to join independent clauses. And think a comma is not strong enough by itself to join 2 sentences. A semicolon is. A comma needs an extra word to help it out. So that's you. And this, I would say, comma splice is the most frequent error that I see in student papers. And I think a lot of times it's just, oh, this is a good idea. It's just what Jesse was saying. Oh, I have a little bit more to say about that. Comma, 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 and we just keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, because it's all on the same topic. So we just keep comma and comma and. All right, I'm going to talk about fused sentences because the quiz will have both together. So a fused sentence is almost the opposite error. Oh, I forgot we have one more example here. I have so much to say, I can't wait to write my essay. Same set of solutions. I have so much to say, period. I can't wait to write my essay. With this one, if we wanted to throw in because, we put it in a different spot. Because I have so much to say, I can't wait to write my essay. I have so much to say, comma, and I can't wait to write my essay. That could work. I have so much to say, semicolon, I can't wait to write my essay. So a fused sentence, two or more independent clauses joined without punctuation. So if we got rid of the commas on the previous examples, we'd have fused sentences. Let me give you a couple extras. I'm so hungry, I can't wait for breakfast. I can't stay awake. This book is so boring. Now we have independent clauses. I'm hungry. That's an independent sentence, right? I'm so hungry. I can't wait. We have a subject, verb. So we need to do something, right? I can't stay awake. This book is so boring. That's one independent clause. This is a second independent clause. So fixes. What are some of the ways, and again, there's multiple correct ways to fix this.
Is that period?
Period, yeah. I'm so hungry, period. I can't wait for breakfast. Good. And again, semicolon. I'm so hungry, semicolon, I can't wait for breakfast. Comma would be a comma splice, so we would need comma conjunction. I'm so hungry, but I can't wait for breakfast, right? That would give it one direction of meaning. I'm so hungry and I can't wait for breakfast. That'd be a slightly different meaning, right? So it all depends, and that's why, again, like somebody can't just go in and fix these things for us. The writer has to, because it's gonna change the meaning. Because I'm so hungry, I can't wait for breakfast. Since I'm so hungry, I can't wait for breakfast. I can't stay awake because this book is so boring. I can't stay awake, comma, and this book is so boring. Rather be two separate problems. I can't stay awake, period. This book is so boring. So, and very often those are just different forms of run-on sentences. We're combining too much. We need to separate more. And that's often what I tell my students is give your readers a place to pause, give them a moment to digest the information you're giving them. And a period will help them do that, right? A period will let them go, okay, the meaning has stopped here. It's going to pick up again here in a second, and I can pause, right? A comma, you shouldn't stop fully on a comma because the idea isn't finished yet. But give people a period to catch their breath, to think things through. All right, so let's take a look at the quiz. So again, I'm still just on the Norton Wright site. And so you can see, like, look how many exercises they have for comma splices and fused sentences. I'm just going to choose the one that's on identifying. Now, a word of warning. So this particular quiz, they jumped in to art history, and the sentences are tangled and they're complex, and they're going to introduce a whole bunch of names and ideas that you've never heard of. Don't be intimidated. We can still get the punctuation on these. All right, so their instructions are to select the one that doesn't have any mistakes. What I'll do is I'll read each one and we can correct it as we go. All right, so I'll just leave the mouse there so it's highlighted. The sculptor Alexander Calder gained fame for his mobiles and wire sculptures of circuses. He went on to produce large sculptures for public areas. Is there an error in this one?
Yeah.
Where is it, or what is it?
For wire sculptures of circuses, and then he went on to produce large sculptures.
Okay, good. So you're recognizing we've got two independent sentences there. How do we fix it? Multiple correct ways to fix it.
With a period there.
Period will do it, yeah. Good, right? And this one, like, especially if we come into the sentence with no experience, and I've read this one too many times, I probably screw it up. We could misread this one. We could read it wrong, right? We might accidentally, he produced mobiles, wire sculptures of circuses. Oh no, hold on, period there, right? And that's the problem, is if your readers have to back up and rethink it, and if they have to do that too many times, you're too hard to read. So yeah, period there will do the job. Semicolon will do the job. Good. All right. The painter Mary Cassatt was born in Pennsylvania, but spent many years in Paris, where the Impressionists thrived. She chose women and children as her special subject. Error, no error. People online, don't be afraid to speak up.
Does she need a comma after born in Pennsylvania? Comma?
Something there, 'cause it's
So,
not-
right, so the word but is a conjunction, right? And we
Yeah.
talked about conjunctions and commas.
You have to have,
She would need a subject in the other half. So if it said, but she spent many years in Paris, then yes, we would put a comma there. But in this case, that's not the error.
Could you
Oh, go ahead.
put a period instead of a comma behind thrived, and then capitalize she, so it's just two sentences?
Correct. Yeah, this one is a comma splice. So this one's combining way too much information into one sentence. If we put the period where Jesse suggests, then we get to pause and then move on to the next idea. So yeah, that's correct. Yeah, so that's a comma splice. Period will do it. Semicolon will do it. Good. Now, of course, that lets us know that our third one is correct. Feminist artist Judy Chicago creates multimedia projects. Her best known work is The Dinner Party, which explores women's history. And you can see that one's just a lot easier to read. And it's still got some long stuff in there, right? It's got a lot of information, but it works a little better. All right, let's do a few more of these. All right. Stuart Davis borrowed Cubism from European artists and made it American. His paintings present bright colors.
separate American and his.
Yes. Yeah, so this one's a fused sentence because there's nothing at all there. So period gives us, there's one big idea, here's the next big idea. It helps your readers. Good. John Singleton Copley was a master portraitist and painter of historical scenes. His works are considered aristocratically elegant.
Add and after the comma.
Comma and his works, yep, that would be a great way to fix it. So this one's a comma splice. That's where the independent clauses separate. So comma and will do the job. Yeah, very good. Known for glass-covered boxes filled with enigmatically arranged found objects and collages, Joseph Cornell was a product of surrealism, which relied on irrational juxtaposition. That's a mouthful. Now we know, because we already fixed the other two, that this is one with no error. Any questions about why or how there's no error? You're like, no, it's just correct. That's fine. So here's my observation as a teacher is, and I think, you know, like if you were taking an art history class, you'd probably write a sentence or two like these. This last one is one that a student would write and then second guess themselves. They go, oh, that's too long. I should put a period in there, and they'll do that. I think that's where someone would make an error, is they say that sentence is too long. It's okay to have some long sentences. You know, if you've been testing it out with an Annie Dillard style or a Judy Brady, like, you know, all right, there is a way to do it and you can make it work. Long doesn't mean incorrect, right? We just have to figure out the correct way to do it. All right. A major proponent of abstract expressionism and action painting, William de Kooning arrived in the United States as a stowaway and first supported himself here as a house painter. Toward the end of his life, he worked on sculptures.
Between inner and toward is a completely separate thought at the end.
Yeah, good. So comma splice here. Period will fix it. Semicolon will fix it. Comma and will fix it, depending on the relationship and the two halves. Good. Yeah, very good. One of the best known paintings by Thomas Eakins, The Gross Clinic, captures a surgical operation, a subject considered inappropriate at the time. Eakins lost an academic position because he used nude models in mixed classes. First you have to be like shocked, like, well, he got fired. The art teacher got fired for nudity. This one's fine. It's long, it's got a lot of information in it, and it's fine. So, you know, sometimes it's just good to gather, right? One of the best known paintings by Thomas Eakins, comma, The Gross Clinic, comma. That's just, all right, best known painting, there's a modifier there, right? This is sometimes called in a positive. Captures a surgical operation, comma, a subject considered inappropriate at the time. So that one's doing the same thing, it's just for that half. And it's long and it's got lots of commas, but it's correct. All right, so we know the last one here. Jenny Holzer produces multimedia works. Electronic message boards are one of the media she uses. What's wrong with this one? It's got a problem.
Works, after works, you got something.
Period, yeah. So it's a fused sentence. That's where one of them ends. Yeah, and this one is one that you could easily misread as you're trying to make sense. Produces multimedia works, electronic, oh, no, hold on, period, electronic message boards. So this is like one that would easily cause a misreading. All right, let's just do one more of these. And we'll pause. Lonely streets, buildings, and interiors dominate the canvases of Edward Hopper. His work has influenced the 21st century photographer of street scenes.
Isn't that one a fused sentence?
It is, yeah. So, do you see where?
Dominant canvases, Edward Hopper, period.
Yeah, and we do the period after the parentheses. Yeah, and this is one that someone might make this error because they feel the parentheses did the job, and sometimes it's kind of scary to like, well, do I have parentheses and periods, or do I just do one of them? Is that enough? And in this case, you do it, and that's another reason why, like in college, I started to make mistakes because I was writing new things. I was like, I've got semicolons, quotation marks, parentheses. I don't need a period in there because it's already a mess. But don't sweat it. Robert Indiana produces pop paintings and sculptures such as his love series that sometimes call to mind large signs. Shaking your head.
I think it's okay.
It's okay, yeah, this one's fine. Good. All right, Winslow Homer excelled in painting dramatic seascapes. One example is On a Lee Shore. This one's got a comma splice. Now, this is one that you're like, well, the one half makes the other clearer, right? So, but here we have one example, subject is verb. Winslow Homer, subject, excelled, verb. So because we've got two different subjects, even though these are closely related, one idea clearly makes the other one easier to understand, it's got a comma splice. All right. So we'll pause there just so I don't overwhelm you with too much of this. I am not going to give you any test or quiz where I ask for the definition of fused sentence, comma splice, or sentence fragment, or ask you to correct those. What I do want is kind of have those in your tool belt, so to speak, as like, okay, I know that this is a common error and here's some common fixes for it, right? And so I will continue, as I look at student papers to say, hey, there's some comma splices in there, and you know where to go to find the information to help it. And just recognize it takes some practice before you can like confidently eliminate all of these. But we were getting better just recognizing them as we went. So the yellow section of the book is all grammar and punctuation. Now, I think it's generally organized most common errors to least common errors. And then I think towards the back of the yellow section, it's more like English for speakers of other languages errors, which really puts it in a different category. And it really depends on what your native language is. When I was in Alaska, I had more Russian students, and Russian students made grammar errors that I'd never seen before because they were used to a different set of language. And then my Spanish speakers will commit different errors than my Arabic speakers. And in the past, I used to have more students from China, and they would have a different set too. And so a lot of it is, our home usage versus how we use language at school. And then also, work is going to influence that. And, depending on what line of work you go into, you'll develop kind of a new set of professional language. I had one student in yesterday's class who kept wanting to put a comma before because in the middle of a sentence. In England, you put a comma before because. In America, you don't. Yeah, and I've had students from Nepal who, when they learned, and they're native English speakers, but when they learned the rules for grammar and punctuation, they learned British rules. And so they'd keep telling me, they're like, you have to stop marking these wrong. I'm right. And I was like, well, you're at an American university. But I mean, that's one of those where I would adjust and say, all right, you're going to go back home to Nepal where the expectation is to follow the British rules. And so we just have to be aware and adapt, because even punctuation is going to change a little bit depending on who you're writing for. My wife and I always had debates in college because like when you write out a list, right, you have a comma. Like I went to the grocery store and I bought grapes, comma, bananas, comma, apples, comma, and peaches. Her instinct is always no comma between and the last one. And mine is always have a comma. And that one is a debated one. And if you're in the sciences, they usually say leave that comma out. And if you're in the humanities, they say put that comma in. And so you'll still see, even within the university, you'll occasionally run into this situation. And that comma rule is in the book, and you can look it up. And I'm right. Everybody, no. You'll notice that it's like, just get used to flipping open the book and looking it up every once in a while. There is nothing wrong with you if you have to look up a rule. And I don't mind too. Like I've had students say, all right, you marked me up for comma splices on essay 1. Will you read essay 2 and just highlight the comma splices? And I've done that, and that's not a problem. Questions or concerns?
So if you're in a situation where, you're not by the writing lab, or you don't have somebody to proof a paper before you have to turn it in, I mean, do you just have to sit there line by line and look for comma splices and all the fun stuff? Or, I mean, what's the best plan of attack for that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say it depends on the weight of the assignment, right? For like the daily essays we do for my class, I would say, type it up, read it through once quickly to catch any errors, and then hand it in, no big deal, right? If there's a few errors, you'll survive. If you're writing a letter of application for a job, write it up, sit on it a couple of days, read it, have somebody else read it, take it to the writing center, then go line by line and catch every single error, right? So if it's high stakes, yes, go line by line. Eventually you will get better at noticing it, and it'll be easier, quicker to catch the errors, and then also to not make the errors. But yeah, I think going line by line is worth it. But you kind of have to decide, all right, is this a high stakes assignment? It's worth a lot of points. This teacher pays attention to grammar and punctuation. Yes, well then I better spend more time on it. Or is this a low stakes assignment? This teacher is not marking up grammar and punctuation. Then I can put a little less attention into it.
Okay.
Does that help?
I thought you were supposed to say everything's high stakes, right?
Oh, but it's not. But yeah, no, I do. I mean, I do want you to get good at it. I do think, sometimes your letter of application to a job will be thrown out for errors. But not always, not everything. Yeah. I mean, do you need to proofread your text messages and have, take them to the writing center? Absolutely not.
Right, but there's just like this crutch, you know what I mean? Like the writing center's right there. I'll just work this up the best I can and then go to the writing center or whatever, you know what I mean? Like I guess just write and read and practice and get better at it for the most part.
Yeah, well, but do go to the writing center, especially these first couple years of college. And do take the papers that are worth more points to the writing center. But like I've even had students, like someone who write rough draft number 1, bring it into my office, get some feedback. They'll make some changes, bring it back to my office, and have me give some feedback. Then they'll do it again, and I'll say, you need to do some of this on your own. And so, if they give me a third or a fourth draft of the same paper, I'll say, yeah, you need some independence, right? Like, don't rely on me, like you said, like as a crutch, don't rely on me to catch all your errors. But if no one's bothered to teach you what the errors are, right, then you do need my help, and that's absolutely fine. Stop by the office. Yeah. So yeah, I think you're asking the right question, Jesse. Like, at what level, you know, are you depending too much on other people versus, you know, like do it on your own? That's a tough one. Because like when I was in high school, I had my dad read every single paper because that guy knew to catch every single error. And there were errors I didn't know about, right? And then I went to college, and then I was like, oh, where's my dad? and I couldn't do that, and I really wanted to. And I had email didn't have attachments back then, so it would have been trickier. But at that point, I had to say, okay, I'm on my own. But I had my roommate read my paper, and I read my roommate's paper, and and sometimes it was the blind leading the blind. They were like, is that wrong? Like, I don't know, it looks wrong. Like, okay, well, let's fix it. But the Writing Center is peer tutoring for that exact reason. Someone closer to your situation who can take a look at it. So yeah, especially as we're just getting started, don't be embarrassed, and do use the resource. Yeah, great question. Other questions? I'd say the more you use the resources early in your student career, when you're writing papers your senior year, you'll have a lot more confidence on some of the issues, and you'll be like, this one's pretty good, I'm ready to hand it in. And that's good. Like, it's earned confidence, right? And we do want you to get there eventually, right? So that you can say like, yeah, I know this one's pretty good. And I had a student after my 1102 class. In 1102, I have him hand in a one-page paper almost every day of class. And I had a student who a couple of years after that said, hey, thanks. That used to be really hard. Now it's easy. And that's what I want, right? I do want to know that it gets easier. All right. That's all I have for today. Finish up Essay 2 by Monday. And then next week we have a midterm exam, but we'll have a day of preparation and questions before that. So finish that up. And there is an online writing assignment for Tuesday, but not for today. All right, thanks for your participation.